2001 OHS management system. Appreciate the partnership we have, the DEQ, and them advertising the webinar, which I think is how a lot of you folks got the heads up. But glad to work with them and glad to be here. Today we're going to give you a real brief overview, and in an hour, that's as much as we can do, is just kind of scrape the surface of this new standard. We've been auditing and implementing safety management systems for quite a long time here. We've been using the OSHA 18001 standard and seen that process improve and help a lot of organizations. And now the ISO folks have got on board and are putting out a new version of the health and safety management system called ISO 45001, and we expect that will be published at some point here in the next few weeks. So life is good. So today we're going to just touch a smidge on safety management systems and processes and where they've been. We're going to go through the standard at a really high level, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how to get started with a health and safety management system. So there have been a number of standards that have been around for a while. There's the Z10, the former version of 18001, the international version of this, and so everyone's kind of had their hand in the ISO game or the health and safety management system for a while, but now I think we're going to get a consistent framework, which is what the ISO folks are trying to do, is to give us a consistent framework. Safety economics. Here's some costs. Apparently, if we kill somebody, it costs $4.5 million. That's what we're worth. But these are just some average costs of what injuries cost organizations. So having an effective program really does result in dollars and cents, and it can really justify the cost it takes to develop and implement and then maintain a certified system. Again, when you take a look at approaches to safety management, for a lot of years we've had the OSHA compliance framework. Many organizations have implemented very effective compliance-based programs to meet and achieve compliance with the OSHA and other safety standards. For a number of years, companies have migrated into more of an injury prevention process of not only trying to comply with the requirements, but yet look for opportunities to prevent injuries, come up with more rigorous investigation processes, and just improve the overall performance of the organization. Now we're seeing companies migrating into a more formal management system, plan, do, check, act process. And again, I think that pushes organizations to a new level of performance, and then ultimately to this paradise that we've called a safety culture, which is really where most organizations, are striving to get to, this paradise of no injuries. Everybody's accountable for safety and everybody works safely. So that's kind of the road that we're on, and we'll talk a little bit about how this framework and certification process can take your management system to the new level. And again, I would encourage you guys to ask questions as you see fit. So when you look at the difference between a compliance-based program, you talk to a lot of companies. We got a great OSHA program. We're in compliance. OSHA loves us. You talk to companies about wanting to invest in improving their safety system, and they'll say, well, we've got this handled. We've got a great safety program. OSHA comes in. They really love what we do. Why do we want to go to this next level? Well, when you look at a compliance-based program, again, the focus is compliance to the regulatory programs. Now, one of the outcomes of compliance is a safer work environment and fewer injuries. But I think there can be more results had. A plan to check and process is performance focused. How do we perform? And you know, I was doing an audit at one organization. They had a stellar safety program. I mean, they had 600, I think 600 or 700 employees. The year before that, they had 5 recordable injuries and I think 0 or 1 lost time injury. And I met with the site manager and I says, well, what are you going to do to improve? And he says, we can't continue to do the same thing harder to get better. And there's a lot of truth to that. We can't just be in more compliance and do the same thing with more rigor to get to the next level of safety performance. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Compliance-based programs tend to be more reactive than proactive, task-oriented versus process-oriented, management-driven processes versus worker participation. We use the hammer to enforce our policies to get with people versus creating a safety culture and behavior-based safety processes. And we rely heavily on lagging indicators versus leading indicators. So that's kind of the difference between the two approaches. Health and safety management systems have been developing for quite some time. You know, management systems themselves, we started out with our quality programs. Back in '96, we started with the environmental programs. You know, the ISO people had kind of shied away from safety for a while. So we had some consensus-based initiatives with the OSHSAS 18001 standard. The International Labor Office came out with their version of a management systems framework, and then the ANSI Z10 program became quite popular in the United States. And then we're now seeing ISO 45001 come out, and this will ultimately replace the 18001 standard as the national or international framework for safety management. And we'll see how, if you have an OSHSAS 18001 management system, or you built one based on the Z10 standard, these things are going to fit nicely into the requirements of ISO 45001. There are a number of areas where I think the 45001 standard has made things more stringent, is looking to make things a little bit more robust and a little bit more focused on performance improvements. But if you've already got a management system in place, there's no need to scrap that and start over. It'll be just a mapping of your existing program into the requirements of the new standard, and then implementing any newer or enhanced requirements. The 45001 standard has been developed using this new Annex SL format. So the ISO people have taken the quality standard, the environmental standard, and now the safety standard, and split it up into the same 10 sections. They use a lot of the same words: context of the organization, risk-based thinking, interested parties, setting objectives. So they've taken a lot of that same terminology and applied it to the different activities. They've also taken the requirements and made it much easier to integrate. So instead of having 3 separate management systems, it's going to become very easy to integrate these into one overall management system for the organization. And they've actually put elements of that within the leadership commitment as far as improving integration of your processes. And as you can see, element by element, when you line them up, you're going to see a lot of very consistent words and verbiages. Now, if you guys want this full comparison, send me an email, and I will email you the full side-by-side comparison. But as you can see, line by line, these standards are going to be very easy to integrate, and I think it's going to go a long way toward really improving the efficiency of how these requirements are met. So again, if you want the complete side-by-side comparison, send me an email and I will I'll email it to you. There's another standard out there called, we'll call it a standard or guidance document, ISO 31000 on risk management. And I've dusted that off and kind of taken a look at that again. And it's really a quite interesting guidance document in the sense that anytime you formalize a process to come to a conclusion, it seems like you get better results, because all of us can sit back and say, well, we know where our risk is, we know what the problems are. But when you go through this regimented process of how you evaluate risk and hazards, and you use a formalized process, much like a Six Sigma type approach to things, it really yields, I think, better answers to what the true risks are. So I just put this slide in here to remind people that this standard exists. As you're looking at risk management, you might want to dust this thing off and take a look at it. And I do think it has a lot of good information relative to the identification of risk and processes to manage risk. And when you look at types of risk, hazard risk, financial risk, operational, strategic, reputational, and compliance, occupational health and safety touches on all of these areas. So most organizations really focus on the hazard risk, the financial risk, and a little bit the compliance risk, but really, your ability to manage occupational safety touches on risk in all facets of your organization. So when you look at risk to your reputation, employment risk, do companies want to work for our organization? What kind of reputation do we have as an employer? Stockholders, what kind of reputation do we have as a good company that controls costs and controls risk? And occupational safety touches on all of these areas. So you should be able to make a pretty convincing case to management that implementing an occupational safety management system is a worthwhile investment. Okay, so that's the kind of the cheerleader section where we're trying to get you fired up, thinking that this is a great program. And the next little bit here, we're going to talk about the standard itself and what the requirements are, and how to go ahead and implement a safety management system. And as you can tell, I'm working from my home office, and my puppy is making a little noise. Okay, so let's see if he's quiet here. One second here. I'm going to try to tame the wild beast. Okay, apparently the UPS guy is pretty exciting. So let's talk about the standard. Well, what are the requirements? If you guys have recently went through your environmental system upgrade, these sections will look very familiar. Section 4 talks about understanding our context and our scope. 5, leadership and worker participation. 6, Planning, which is risk assessment and objectives. We're going to support the process, which includes a vigorous communications process. Operational controls, management. We're going to evaluate performance. That's a big focus in the standard. How do we measure performance? And we will improve. Also, that includes our corrective action process. So it really has made it much simpler to take these environmental and safety programs. Many of you guys are EHS managers. You have to manage both parts of your organization, and having these systems integrated will, I think, make these things a little bit simpler. Okay. Again, it's based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act process. We're going to take a look at the external issues that affect us, the needs and expectations of interested parties. Workers, that's a big deal. Run it through a Plan, Do, Check, Act process and improve our performance. Again, the focus of any management system is to achieve our intended outcomes. So as a manager, we need to understand what those are. And the basic intended outcomes of a safety management system are continual improvement of your safety performance, fulfillment of your legal and other requirements, and achievement of your safety objectives. And this should be the output of an effective safety management system. One of the things I thought was quite interesting is that at least in the last version of the standard that came out, they're still calling these legal and other requirements instead of the compliance obligations, which I would have expected. But it's basically the same thing. So again, looking at the context of the organization, this just means what are the internal and external things that can affect our safety program. The safety of not only our employees, but of visitors. Are there things adjacent that might create hazards for employees trying to drive into work, and really understanding the entire context of the organization. And here's where we're starting to see the enhanced focus on workers' interest and worker participation. And you're going to see that throughout the standard. And then all those things have to be incorporated within the scope, and then we need to define our safety management processes. So things like unions and union agreements, what do our stockholders expect from us, management's expectation, if we're an individual plant, what does the corporate office expect from us, local community issues, neighborhood, is our plant in a residential neighborhood? Obviously, OSHA has expectations of us. All these things that are part of our context. The next section, leadership and worker participation. Again, right in the title, worker participation. Management must show and demonstrate leadership, commitment, and accountability for the effectiveness of the safety program. We're going to define a policy, roles and responsibilities, and then some very specific requirements for worker consultation and participation. So we're going to need to see evidence that management can demonstrate leadership, commitment, and accountability for the effectiveness of the safety program. Take a lot of different shapes. In the most effective sites that I've been to, safety criteria are set as performance goals for supervisors, for managers, for site leaders, for EHS managers. Everybody has is accountable for safety, and especially at the management level. Your policy has to contain the 3 commitments to comply with legal stuff, eliminate hazards and reduce risk, continual improvement, and to include the consultation and participation of workers. That's a big deal. Emphasizing worker involvement. This is not to be a management-driven process, but a culture-driven process. When you take a look at the specific areas of consultation and participation, there's going to be a lot of different ways to show conformance to these requirements, but not showing conformance is no longer an option. So consultation is where we seek the views of parties before we make a decision. And participation is where these workers and parties are actually involved in decision-making process. So ways we can do that, again, most organizations have safety committees, but we need to have a very robust safety committee process. I highly encourage companies to set up behavior-based safety observation programs. Highly effective, great at reducing in an ongoing process to identify risk, and it shows a lot of participation by the employees as well. Set up cross-functional incident investigation teams. So production workers, supervisors, and managers all involved in the incident investigation process. Enhanced communication, where we're actively integrating safety topics into all of our communications process, and then setting up performance goals for managers and supervisors based on the safety performance of their groups and their ability to enforce the requirements. Okay, so the next section gets into the big deal here, planning and risk assessment. The standard requires organizations to identify hazards, to assess and evaluate risk, and define opportunities to reduce risk and reduce injuries. So there's some very specific requirements on how to implement a hazard identification process, how to assess risk and communicate the risk, how to reduce risk through evaluating the effectiveness of your operational controls. So it's no longer good enough to just say, we've got a risk from our forklifts, therefore we have an OSHA power industrial truck program. That's not enough. We've got to really look at high-risk activities, implementing not just the compliance program, but the control needed to minimize the injuries relative to that risk. So there may be some areas where simply implementing the OSHA program is sufficient. But there's going to be other risks that you have that may require you to go beyond what OSHA requires and put controls in place that effectively mitigate the risks that are present. And without a truly effective risk analysis process, you're not going to get to the right answers. We're going to determine our legal requirements, which we've been doing that for decades. We're going to plan actions to mitigate the risk, and then we're going to set safety objectives that are aligned with our performance measurables. So we're going to set objectives that are targeting an improvement in performance. And again, for organizations that have been doing injury prevention and performance analysis, this won't be anything new, but it just needs to be tied back to your risk assessment process. So when you look at identifications of hazard and risk assessment, the process needs to be proactive and ongoing. So we don't identify hazards once and evaluate them and we're done. We have to have processes in place that do an initial assessment of risk, monitor risk reduction, and are able to detect risk for routine and non-routine activities. So things like our job hazards assessments, we're good at getting the initial work hazards identified. For non-routine activities, a safe work permit, or what some people call predictive risk assessments, are a great tool to evaluate non-routine activities. Through our incident investigation process, we need to really look at the incident relative to the risk that was identified, and does that risk need to be reevaluated. And then our management of change processes. That's another area where we have to determine, are there additional risks that are being risks that we're exposed to based on changes in chemicals, a change in production processes, change in management approaches. How do these changes affect risk? Obviously, we need to look at the potential emergencies, fire, medical, types of safety emergencies, and then we have to maintain these processes that on an ongoing basis can evaluate a risk, help us identify them, and manage the risks that we face every day. Many organizations are going to implement a typical type of a risk analysis where they go through the hazard identification process. They look at the risk of the consequence and then the likelihood of occurring. They prioritize the risk, acceptable, intermediate, high, or catastrophic, and then they set their objectives and priorities based on the risk analysis. And here's just a kind of a standard risk assessment where you might look at the risk, what are my control measures, what's the actual risk, what additional controls do I want to put in place, and then what is any residual risk. Again, that level of scrutiny is not always, I can't say it's required by the standard, but this does help demonstrate how risk is evaluated, and as you move forward in time, areas where you're able to actually reduce risk and show a reduction in those scores. Other requirements, this isn't anything new. At this point, we've just got to identify all the legal and other requirements, the union agreements, the local community agreements, agreements with our customers and suppliers that we have to comply with, and then set up controls to validate that we are going to have processes to comply with all of these requirements. Any questions on risk assessment, hazard identification, or planning? Okay, support. Again, very similar to our ISO 14000 process. Management will provide adequate resources. We're going to ensure that we have competencies, and we'll define what they are. This goes back to not only your traditional competencies in your OSHA programs, but the competency of your EHS manager, management competencies, and being able to lead incident investigations, and what is the safety competency required to be an effective supervisor. Those are some areas where what you may be doing would be challenged by your external auditor as to are they sufficient. I did one audit where the company sent all of their supervisors through an OSHA 10-hour training course because they felt like that was necessary to give them the competency to take ownership of the safety of the people under their responsibility. Awareness, there's a little bit more awareness of what people have to be aware of, and the hazards in their areas, and their ability to stop working. We have to make employees aware that if I don't feel safe, it's okay with no ramifications that I stop working and go to my supervisor. That's kind of one of the enhanced pieces. The communication process, again, needs to be effective, and I think a bit more robust than what they have been. So getting supervisors to take ownership of safety communication at every available turn on a daily basis. Safety topic. We have a BBS program. What are the top 3 hazards? What are we doing today to mitigate those top 3 hazards? But again, constant communication about safety as a topic to help develop this safety culture that everyone claims to want. And then last but not least, we're going to control our documentation, much like we do with our quality and our safety, our quality and environmental programs. Okay, operational controls. Here we see a lot more specific controls relative to safety than we did with the environmental and quality programs. So in general, we have to control our risk and opportunities. Where we've identified risk and opportunities, those things need to have planned actions and controls in place. And an operational control can be, should look at the hierarchy of controls. Can we eliminate the hazard? Can we substitute it? What are the administrative controls? And then last but not least, what are the PPE requirements? It needs to be focused on risk reduction. We need to have a very strong control of our management of change process. And then some specific controls for purchasing and procurement, contractor management and contractor safety programs, and then outsourcing. So again, a number of very specific and different requirements there. And then last but not least, a very well planned out emergency preparedness program. We need to identify emergencies, medical, weather, fire, other issues that can impact worker safety. Come up with plans for how to respond to those emergencies, define roles and responsibilities for everybody and what their role and responsibility is in the event of an emergency, have equipment necessary and maintain that equipment, and then train people, and then go ahead and periodically test our emergency response procedures. So again, nothing new here than what you've probably been doing forever, but the big thing is the testing of the emergency response procedures. Linda says, we need your email. Okay, I will get you my email. So you can send me a request for that comparison of the standards. So again, operational control and planning has gotten to be a bit more detailed. But the first step is that they want us to be able to demonstrate that we've evaluated risk using the hierarchy of controls. So either through your risk assessment process or your identification of controls process, you're going to need to be able to demonstrate to your auditors that we've actually looked and considered ways to eliminate the hazard, ways that we can substitute things to try to replace the hazard. We've implemented engineering controls to try to isolate people from the hazard. We've defined some administrative controls, work instructions, procedures, and then lastly, we've defined a PPE process. So how you demonstrate that will probably be through some form of your risk assessment, hazard ID and risk assessment control process. Another key thing is safety through design and management of change. So as you guys are implementing new programs, you're putting in new processes. We're putting on the new 50,000 square foot addition to our facility. We're putting in the new paint line or the new CNC machine. How do we design safety into that process in the design phase? Don't wait till it's time to turn the machine on. But how do we look at safety in the design phase, in the ordering phase of the equipment, and in the actual implementation phase of the equipment? So it's never too early to think about safety. And again, a number of organizations that I've audited and worked with have very robust safety design processes, safety design checklists. They make sure that the equipment has the proper guarding and the grounding of the electricity and the emergency shutoffs and the lockout tagout points that are labeled. And those are all things that can be done and should be done through your your engineering design process. Section 9 talks about performance evaluation. So we're gonna monitor and measure performance of our process program. We're gonna evaluate effectiveness. We're gonna look at our compliance activities. We're gonna internal audit our processes to keep them effective, and then we're gonna report to management on the effectiveness of the program. So these are all different areas that we will monitor and measure to establish the overall safety performance of our organization or scope. So again, this is nothing really new, but we want to have the obvious lagging indicators that we're all focused on. Injuries, recordable versus non-recordable, lost work days, work comp costs. On the fence where to put near misses, that is probably a little bit leading, a little bit lagging, because by the time it's a near miss, it's already occurred, but we didn't get hurt. So a good near miss reporting and investigation process. But some other leading indicators can be tracking our training program, ergonomic opportunities identified and corrected, reduction of risk, employee perception surveys, safety audits. I thought I put the behavior-based safety observations that a lot of companies are making. So those would be all leading indicators. So the goal here is to get our lagging indicators so good that there's not much trend to them. So we're trying to trend our leading indicators, and that's where we can trend our improvements. Because the lagging ones have gotten just so darn good that they're up and down at kind of a noise level. And if you recall what the one plant manager said, we can't keep doing the same thing harder to get better results. We've got to start doing things differently. Okay, and then last but not least, the standard says we will improve. So as expected, 10.1 and 10.3 deal with continual improvement. The general piece says we're going to identify opportunities for improvement and implement planned actions to achieve those opportunities. We're going to improve the effectiveness of our safety program, and improving the effectiveness should yield a result in improved safety performance. And that's kind of the game plan there. And then the section on incident, investigation, nonconformity, and corrective action. Again, the immediate feedback to any safety program is an incident. Whether it is a near miss, a first aid or non-recordable injury, lost time, this is all feedback this is immediate feedback to the effectiveness of our program. And through the incident investigation process, we can understand and find a lot of risk and risk reduction opportunities. So we really need to have a very robust incident investigation process. We need to first be able to report the incident, get all the facts, develop a cross-functional investigation team appropriate for the type of incident. So for a first aid incident, I'm not going to have a 10-person investigation team. For a lost time amputation, I might. So setting up an investigation team to investigate what happened in the root cause. And then determining, is corrective action needed? So that there is an understanding that you may go through an investigation process, and based on everything that occurred, it was just human error, and there is no systemic flaw that contributed to the incident. Therefore, no investigation is needed. That is a possibility. But once we determine that corrective action is needed, then we need to go through a root cause analysis, corrective and preventative action planning, and then completion of the corrective action. I did have another great thought here, but I'm at the age now where these great thoughts leave me, but then come back to me, which is kind of nice. So it just came back to me. Your incident investigation can be proportionate to the incident. So first aid reporting, people they say, I don't want to do that because I don't want to do a big form for the investigation piece. So let's say, as an example, we put a first aid log on the top of our first aid kit. Anytime anybody takes anything out of the first aid kit, they're supposed to write it down, a little bit of information. They should report that to their supervisor. They should have a discussion about what occurred. They should maybe go look at the area if they need to. And then the supervisor makes the determination, does this investigation warrant documentation and further follow-up? That's a process. It doesn't require an 8D or big investigation report for a minor first aid injury. But we don't want to ignore those first aid injuries because they can provide that feedback, the risk that may lead to a recordable injury. If we fixed it now, this wouldn't have happened later. So you want to look at your organization and see what you can do to encourage people to report first aid injuries, make it easy to report, make it easy to investigate, and then if there are risks that need to be addressed, a way that those can get reported out to the management team, and really make it a very simple process. So that's the standard itself. I just want to take a brief look at some of the differences between the OHSAS 18,001 and 45,001 program for people that are trying to upgrade their systems. 45,001 has this basic need to identify your contacts and look for processes that need to be implemented. That's a little bit more rigorous. There's a lot more specific areas of required worker consultation and participation. That's a big deal. The 45,001 standard is more focused on the identification of risk and opportunities as needed to achieve our intended outcomes. So 18,001 was really focused a lot on hazard identification, where the 45,000 is more worked on, focused on risk evaluation and effectiveness of controls. So much like I said before, if you identified forklifts as a hazard, simply developing a power industrial truck program is not sufficient if that's a high risk in your organization. You're going to need to put additional controls in place to mitigate that. I work for one organization. They went through all of their facilities, and they had some big facilities, and mapped out all of the pedestrian pathways, all of the forklift traffic, and implemented a complete pit pedestrian separation with guards, markings, and if there's areas where they couldn't separate the two, some really enhanced signage and things to make it very clear that these were high-risk areas. And that's really where the 45,001 process wants organizations to get to for the higher risk activities. There's a lot more focus on leadership and management commitment and accountability. So we really have some teeth to bite into as an auditor for organizations where the supervisory staff don't enforce the safety rules. Managers that aren't held accountable for the safety of their departments. There's a lot stronger wording in the 45,000 standard and allows us to right nonconformances that maybe we couldn't have under 18,001. Again, a lot more emphasis on setting objectives aligned with performance measures and really challenging people to come up with alignment between their objectives and performance measures. Linda's talking about HIPAA. I can't comment. I'm not a HIPAA expert. If it does, then I'm in trouble. And some of that stuff goes a little bit too far, but you guys will have to decide what's HIPAA compliant, what's not. Again, extended requirements apply to participation, communication, and a lot more relative to procurement. Much more stringent. Again, as you guys move forward, and we try to sell the concept of first a compliant management system, developing a management process that complies. That would require some resources from your company. And then if you want to go to that next step and get certification, there are more benefits to that. But if you're part of an organization that's got OSHA recordables and work comp costs that are worth controlling, management teams and ownership that's concerned with employee safety and their reputation as employers, cost reduction and insurance reductions, complying with all of the OSHA programs. This is a great process to implement to achieve all those benefits. When you look at certification, again, I'm not trying to sell certification services, but it holds companies accountable to an outside party. Every year, your auditor comes in, management kind of tidies up the records a little bit. The auditor challenges you on areas to improve. It really does add value to your program. It's a further demonstration to your stakeholders, your stockholders, your employees, bankers, customers, that you are a well-managed corporate company. And when you look at supply chain, you want to see a supplier shut down, watch one have a fatality. That's going to shut down a supplier as fast as you can blink your eyes. Then all of a sudden, your supply chain's disrupted. So you're demonstrating to your customer that you take that stuff quite seriously. And the certification process is a big driver for continuous improvement. So some organizations started with complying management systems and let them mature a little bit, and then pushed into a certified management system. At this point, we're not seeing a lot of companies with a requirement for providers, suppliers. Not that it couldn't happen, but we're not seeing it yet. But I do think it's, your sales team, when they go out and meet with new customers, they put it on the table. Here's our quality certification. Here's our environmental. Here's our safety program. We're a supplier you can count on. And I do think there is some value to that, and it's just up to you guys to maybe articulate that to your management team, what that value could or might be. Again, like with any other certification, your registration company, once you've selected them, will come in. They'll likely do a stage 1 audit to go through your documentation and validate that you've implemented the right processes. They will then come out and do a stage 2 audit, which would be your full registration audit. That you will achieve certification. Typically, you'll go through a 3-year certification cycle. Next one will be a surveillance, research, and you go through that same process as you do with environmental. I don't see where things will be anything different. If you already have an 18,001 program, I don't know exactly what the transition period is, but I imagine it'll be like the other ones where they give you a 3-year transition period to transition out of 18,001 and transition to the 45,001 standard. Okay, now Linda asked about corrective action. What types of corrective action tools do you suggest? You know, take a look at how you do corrective action. And again, with an incident, you know, there's three very distinct phases of an incident. We get it reported. We investigate it. We determine the need for corrective action. Yes or no? With nonconformities, it's the same way. If we have a nonconformance, we've got to get the root cause in corrective action plan started. As far as tools go, I like things that make it easy to do all three things well. If you've got one form that's for everything, it's a challenge. So I like it where you have a nice, concise incident reporting form. It's easy for people and supervisors to fill out and drives people to document the incident. Then a nice, comprehensive incident investigation tool with the output of identified risk and need for corrective action, and then a corrective action tool that really buries down into the root cause. And that's where I'll challenge a lot of you safety people to really get into a good root cause tool and use any of the standard, 5Y, fishbone, whatever you use, just make it effective. And any other questions? Well, as far as how to get started with putting a program together, the first step is you have to have management support. If you don't have management support, do not take this on as a safety professional. This must be a top-down process with top-down accountability. And if your management team is they're unwilling to set performance criteria for managers and supervisors, they're unwilling to implement a robust communication process, they won't participate in incident investigation, you just tell them there's no sense getting started. So you really have to have a management team that's committed to cooperating and working with all these tools. Then we need to develop a really detailed implementation plan. So you're going to need to establish a good cross-functional team of people that will lead the effort. This, again, cannot be a safety-driven program. This has got to be a management-driven program. So we need a safety professional. We need somebody from HR, production, quality, maintenance, shipping and receiving on the team. This team will lead the development of the program. Then you're going to need to define the people, those internal resources, and come up with a budget. When you budget, please budget a lot of time and money for consultants, because we need the work. No, but take a look at, if you're going to implement yourself, external training you might need. If you do want to bring in a consultant, what their role is. And typically, I think the role of a consultant is to optimize your time spent on the project. So if you have 6 people in a conference room and they're wondering what to do next, that's money being wasted. Where a consultant can come in, facilitate a meeting, push out tasks and next steps, and then leave the site and let you guys do your business. That's kind of the role I see as a consultant, is just to optimize the time you guys spend implementing the program. Determine how and where to integrate. Again, we've got 3 standards. We need to integrate things together. So talk to the different departments, environmental and quality, and say this is where we see integration opportunities. Provide regular updates to the management team. Once you've started, every management meeting needs to have an update of where we are with the safety management system. Don't let management forget what you're doing, because they're busy and they might want to forget. But every manager's meeting needs to have an update on the process. Then obviously you need to select your registration company. Most companies will go with the same people that they use for quality or for their environmental system. You don't have to, but it does make things easier. So I would suggest that if you're going to buy a certification service, you get it through the same company. And then begin communications with them early in the process. Ask them about what their certification process is, what their requirements are, how they see the process unfolding, and learn about that as part of your implementation so that you implement a system that is easy for them to audit, easy for you to demonstrate conformity. So Steve, at my facility, we have a separate access card controlled first aid station. There is a sign-in sheet with an option name. We also allow the employee to release as much or as little information. All sign-in forms logs are destroyed at the end of the day. Okay. Well, again, this sounds like some process you have to meet these wonderful HIPAA requirements. So, yeah, I mean, whatever you have that allows you to do some minimal investigation. Because, again, for really small incidents, people tend to want to not report and not investigate. But if you can make a real simple investigation process that lets you do it, it's informal, maybe you don't document it, but once you do it, the supervisor has the option to say, you know what, I think there's something here. We need to push this up the chain of command. I'm gonna complete an incident report. So that little informal process goes a long ways toward risk identification and risk reduction. And that's kind of the name of the game. Okay, well, that's a bulk of what we had. A couple of things we've got coming up is we are putting together a full 6-hour webinar on how to implement a health and safety management system, complete with tools, how to complete risk assessments, communication processes. I mean, everything anybody could want or need that's thinking about implementing a 45,001 program. So we're very proud of that, and I think it's a very effective tool to get programs started. We're also offering an integrated internal audit course so that we can train people on how to integrate environmental and safety issues at the same time. This is a 3-day program, and we'll train people and qualify them to be internal auditors, both for environmental management and safety management. So if any of these things seem interesting to you, please follow up and ask. Somebody was kind enough to post my email address, which I think is on the next slide. I'll leave that up. And again, if you want the side-by-side comparison in a Word file, I'll send that to you. You can use it for what you want. If you have any questions about anything we talked about, please feel free to email and ask. And if you're thinking about moving towards certification, let us know if there's anything we can do. And lots of times we can come in and do a presentation like this to the management team to get things started, be involved in the kickoff of the process. We can help you come in, do a day where we come in and help develop the implementation plan. So there's a lot of different ways we can help you guys get your program started. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys taking your time out to listen to me ramble on for an hour. If you have any more questions, please chat them in. If not, have a safe day. Thank you.